Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. So today, I have an interesting letter that comes from a young guy called Max who's trying to better understand the situationship that he was in, and he's unsure as to whether or not this was simply a case of they're just not that into him. I'm gonna just dive straight into this letter, read it out, and share my own 2 cents to see what I think of this situation that he's been through. Okay, so Max starts out. This is a story of two people because there isn't a way of telling the story of one without the other. Being gay, I moved to London for university when I was 18. I was excited about dating. I matched with Chris online, and the conversation we had became very deep fast. I quickly sensed and feared that he was pulling away, but I was already drawn to him. Not only was he good looking, but he was also the first person that I felt a mutual understanding with. Nothing ever happened. We never met. Friends always tell me to move on. He has been on my mind every day for years. I reached out a few years later, and then again we chatted. But every time I tried to progress the relationship, nothing would happen. I eventually confronted him about it, and he cited mental issues and substance abuse, said how I was a really good person, and apologized for misleading me, but is broken and not invested in relationships now. We are going to be returning to that because that is a very interesting thing that they've just said. I was heartbroken and felt that my feelings weren't validated as there was nothing concrete between us two. Yeah, I can imagine. One night, I needed validation and messaged someone who had previously shown interest in me but hadn't also met me. Turns out this guy, Andy, was relocating soon for work. We chatted and got along and found time before we left to meet up. Our relationship was never on the table. He was relocating, and I still wasn't over Chris. But we kept in touch as we got along, naively thinking that it's a friendship. Soon after he relocated, he was lonely in a new city and burnt out from work. We became each other's emotional support and would be having phone calls every day. Wow. It felt very intimate. None of us were in each other's lives, and we would share details of everything in our lives. Avoidance started showing when he mentioned he was interested in someone back in London. I was a little shocked that he hadn't brought up this guy before, and it felt like reasons to me and him would never work out. And also because it wasn't an issue with this guy. He asked to cease sexual contact, but then quickly pulled away from regular contact with me. Then eventually, after some tension, asked to end this friendship. We met up a few months to talk about things, and he admitted that this was never a pure friendship, but he said he can't have a relationship with me. He gave me the option of trying to be friends or ending things completely. Something else I'll be returning to. I went for the former, but this quickly became unsustainable and I ended things. looking back, it might sound crazy, but I think there was love, but that was a part of him that was ashamed of ever admitting that that might have been the case. I'm much younger than him, and I have a lot of access to his troubled past that I think that even I know more about him than his closest friends know. I have no regrets about these two situationships, and I feel like I learned a lot. However, I have a few questions. Are they avoidant or just not interested? It's very difficult because it seems that I don't have a label that cements how I feel. I can't even say I've dated these people, yet I sometimes feel crazy to think that these feelings are romantic or quasi-romantic. I don't think I try to fix someone, but I certainly value people being open. How do I stop myself from attracting people who are avoidant and or not ready to commit? Okay, Max, I love this so much because as a gay man myself, this is one of the more common conundrums that I see of people who are in our community, and by our community I mean the LGBTQIA plus community, experience in dating. And it's a little bit different from straight dating in that I think what makes these experiences really challenging is that because there's already a lot of shame in being part of the LGBT community for a lot of people, it can often mean that we never really have these solidified relationships. We're almost sort of tiptoeing around and being like, is this or isn't this a thing? And I think when we're younger too, and this is a common experience felt across anyone of any sexuality, I think there is a lot of difficulty in transforming something that feels like a crush into something that's a more of a solidified relationship. And I think for a lot of us people in the LGBTQA plus community, we sort of advance very slowly through dating and relationships because many of us don't often get that opportunity in high school. So our 20s sort of become that experience of doing what we might have once done if we had the opportunity to when we were in our teens. And so it's a bit of a slow burn for a lot of us as well, too. All right, so I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, let's assume for a minute that these guys just weren't that into you. Let's take Chris first. I mean, we could say potentially that this guy just wasn't that into you on the basis that, he's citing, even though he's citing mental health issues and substance abuse, you know, it seems to me that he doesn't want to really take any initiative to advance anything over that. And the fact that he never met you and also nothing ever happened, I mean, I could very easily just reduce this to he just didn't even seem to want to connect with you. He was just leading you on and he was just, dragging this out for his own benefit. And I mean, it could certainly seem that way based on the fact that it was just very limited effort on his part. And I also think too, given the fact that you mentioned how he's good looking and you feel like there was a mutual understanding, I mean, to me, he could have just been someone who was bored and wanted some attention just to make him feel better. I will return to talk about Chris in a hot second because I think there's more to that story than meets the eye, and I'm not ready to conclude on a he just wasn't that into you. I think there was more to it than that. But let's also talk about Andy. I think with Andy as well, you know, if we're going to use the line, he just wasn't that into you, I think what's really interesting to me is the fact that, you were both apparently having sex. You were also both sharing a lot about one another in terms of what was going on emotionally. You weren't really formally calling it a relationship. And I wouldn't even call this friends with benefits because to me, you've already crossed some significant lines here in terms of things being romantic. Yeah, it seems to me like, he's pulling away before he takes it a step further and just ends up, trying to back away and using this new guy who's in the picture as a way of sort of creating space between the two of you. So yeah, if we wanted to be a little bit reductive, we could say that both Andy and Chris weren't just that into you, but I don't feel like stopping there. I actually feel like saying, I think there's more to the story between both of these guys, and I actually feel like for both of them, I actually do sense there's a bit of avoidance. So here's what I think. As per attachment theory, as per avoidant attachment, which is all about fear of intimacy, there's definitely some stuff here which is consistent with someone who might have an avoidant attachment. So let's start with Chris. Let's go back to what he was telling you about how, He's citing some mental health issues and substance abuse. And here's the kicker. You're a really good person. I'm sorry for leading you on, but I'm broken and not invested in being in a relationship right now. It may seem like a small thing, but there is a very self-defeating attitude that a lot of people with avoidant attachment have, which is, I am broken. You won't like me. If we get together, you will leave me. You won't think I'm good for love. So I'm going to say here that this is definitely sounding like he could potentially have avoidant attachment. And his mental health issues and substance abuse, I want to also throw in there and say it's very common for people who have quite a severe avoidant attachment to have both of those. Anyone with insecure attachment usually struggles with mental health issues, but substance abuse is quite common with avoidant attachers. Many of them use substances as a coping mechanism to avoid dealing with their own feelings. So a lot of this to me sounds like it's definitely in the realm of someone who is potentially someone with avoidant attachment. I think if he just wasn't that into you, I don't think he would have gotten this far. Like to me, I sort of feel like he could have just cut it off and been like, listen, I'm not really feeling it. I wish you all the best. Done. Over and done with. Wouldn't have continued having this conversation. But I also think too that, the fact that you've also felt like things became very deep with him very fast, and then you also sense that he was pulling away. You see, if he just wasn't that into you, usually in my experience, and I speak this for myself and all the clients I've worked with in this space, that transition is often quite apparent where someone's just quite blunt and is just like, listen, I'm not that into you. I don't want to get to know you. I don't want to actually get that deep with you. It's kind of like a flat line in terms of energy. The fact that you've mentioned you became very deep and then there was pulling away makes me think, well, again, this is consistent with avoidant attachment. What do avoidants hate? Intimacy, commitment. And it seems like there is a little bit of that potentially coming on there in terms of the connection piece. So I'm sensing there could be a bit of avoidant attachment there. Now let's talk about Andy. So Andy's an interesting one because to me, what I find really interesting about this is it seems like you got a lot further with Andy than you did with Chris. So when you were navigating the I'll call it the situationship because you even stated a relationship was never on the table. It seems to me like, you went into this, and can I just say in future, I know, look, I get it that no one really teaches us about this stuff, but for the love of God, and it's not your fault that you didn't know this, but I'm telling you this now. Please, 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 Max, just remember that it's very wise to articulate what you're looking for in dating because it's really important to actually have those boundaries for yourself to protect yourself. Because being clear about what you're looking for, even if it's a bit, look, I get it. It's very scary to articulate what you want and to have a fear that, people are going to run away from you if you state what you want. But I'd rather they run now. I'd rather they actually back away than tell you months in after you thought this was going somewhere that they're not looking for a relationship. So I do just want to say that piece for just reflection. But in saying that, I do find it very interesting that with Andy, you guys are getting similarly to what happened with Chris. You guys are getting quite deep and you're sharing details of your lives, even though you're living from the sounds of it quite separately and you're not having like a full-fledged, romantic relationship. And so it's interesting how there seems to be a pattern emerging of you tend to get quite deep with these guys. And then there's always this switch that seems to flip with some of them. Well, in this case, both of these dudes, where, you know, in this case with Andy, as soon as you guys are getting deeper, he's then bringing up that he's seeing this new guy and he's also citing reasons as to why it would never work out. He's also ceasing sexual contact and quickly pulling away regular contact from you. Can I also say, it's interesting that you didn't mention he's ceasing sexual contact with you because he's already found himself in a relationship. To me, I feel like there was probably a lack of communication from his side about, where he was at and what was going on. To me, I feel like, it's very interesting. You guys are having this intense, emotional bond from the sounds of it, and you are, having sexual contact. I just sort of think, well, if he was still dating while this was going on, a healthier person would probably articulate that, if they are engaging, in a more friends with benefits-esque experience, they'd probably keep you in the loop about what was going on. And they also wouldn't be getting that close to you emotionally. And they certainly, would communicate if they felt like things had crossed the line well before they met this new person. So this is already very immature and emotionally unavailable behavior in my books. And it's interesting how they're the ones declaring that after some tension, they're ending the friendship. I find it funny that you mentioned that this was quote unquote, you were saying, I naively thought this was a friendship. It's like, bro, to both of you, you've both been sleeping with each other and emotionally comparing notes with one another based on what I'm reading here. So if that's the case, to me, I do feel like there's definitely a lot more going on than mere friendship. And I find it interesting. I'm assuming he said to you, I'm ending this friendship. Interestingly enough, I find it very, you know, I find it again consistent with avoidant attachment that he gave you the option of trying to be friends or ending things completely. And I can see it's interesting how, this became quickly unsustainable. Of course it did. So when you say looking back, it might sound crazy, but I think there was love, but that was a part of him that was ashamed of ever receiving that. Hell yeah. Again, to me, this seems like avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachers do not usually feel good when it comes to genuine connection because it's not something that they're usually subconsciously equipped to deal with. So what you're sharing here definitely sounds like it could fall into that ballpark as well, too. Now, in regards to the 2 points that you've raised, I've covered, I feel, the first point, which is, are they avoidant or are they just not interested? I'd actually say, I'm leaning more avoidant than just not interested. And I know that may sound a bit armchair psychology of me, but frankly, the behavior of what they've shown, and even yours, definitely suggests anxious avoidant trap stuff going on too. I could be wrong. But in my experience, I'm usually find that a lot of this stuff does add up over time. So it's not to say that, I understand why you're thinking, are they just not that interested? I'd say, on one hand, I suppose they're not that interested in the sense that they're not actually willing to sort of push past their insecurities. Plus, also, I want to go back to what I was saying before. From the sounds of it, you're all quite young. And, when we're in that stage of figuring out dating and relationships, we do some weird and also some immature stuff when we're just getting our feet off the ground with dating and relationships. So often it takes people with all insecure attachments some time to find their feet. And when they're like, this is what I'm looking for, this is the kind of experience I want, here are my boundaries, it's a work in progress. And I think, look, you're doing a great job of just reflecting on a lot of this stuff already. And you mentioned it's very difficult because it seems that I don't have a label that cements how I feel. Yeah, well, fair enough. I can't say I've dated these people, yet I sometimes feel crazy to say that these feelings are romantic or quasi-romantic. As someone who's gone through a similar situation to this, I've referred to people like this before as my ex, even if they weren't in a full-blown romantic relationship, because even though I've had multiple situationships where there was, varying degrees of intensity between them, I think it's okay to say, look, I did feel like there was love there. I think it's okay to own your truth in this. Listen, even if the other person doesn't want to acknowledge it, at the end of the day, I don't really care about them. At the end of the day, this has got to be your truth. How does it feel to you? And I know in this day and age, we can be very judgmental on ourselves and say, we're being delusional for thinking and feeling this. These are your feelings. You're allowed to feel and be like, this is how I feel about my time with these people. You are allowed to say, I felt that between Andy with Chris, I felt like there was love there between both of these people. It may not have been a full-fledged romantic relationship, but I do feel like there was something going on there beneath the surface that was never really properly acknowledged between us. And, this is just how it all went down. So I'd say, yeah, you have every right to sort of come up with whatever feels real for you and valid for you. And that makes sense for you, narratively speaking. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now for the last question you've asked me. How do I stop myself from attracting people who are avoidantly attached and not ready to commit? This is a very tricky question to answer in the time that I have available for this. So I'm going to do my best to sort of break it down in terms of what I know and some actionable steps. If you find that you are dating people who are emotionally unavailable, severely avoidantly attached, you probably have an insecure attachment, subconscious belief systems about love, and some stuff that you need to work on internally. What might that look like? So the reason I didn't just say you clearly have an anxious attachment is because I don't think it's always appropriate to just jump to that label straight away. I think people need to figure this out for themselves because I know plenty of fearful avoidant attachers who also find themselves in this category of dating unavailable people as well. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that it's like, okay, I think what would be really good is you know that you've already had two guys, presumably in a row, where you've found that there's been degrees of lack of commitment, likely avoidance. This is probably the bases of a potential pattern forming in your relationships. Here's what I would say. If you are someone on a recovery journey and you don't want to be dating these kind of people anymore, I think it's really good to ask yourself, what is it that I was attracted to in these people? Are there traits and qualities about these particular guys that remind me of people that I used to grow up with? Was I drawn to them because they remind me of the class jock that I was really attracted to when I was a teenager, but never really could be with when I was younger? Do they remind me of those emotionally unavailable people that I used to grow up with? Maybe they're resembling a parent, your parents' behavior. They resemble someone that you thought would be the kind of guy that you'd want to be with. And by the way, when I'm saying guy in this context, I mean this for anyone who dates men, not just, gay men in this context, women, non-binary people. I really want to make it clear that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter sort of where you fall in terms of sexuality. If you find yourself constantly dating, in this case, men who display this pattern, you may find that there are certain traits or qualities that you're trying to, that you find yourself attracted to because maybe internally it feels like a challenge. It feels exciting to go after the bad boy. It feels exciting to go after the class jock. It feels, really intense, filled with butterflies to go after someone who's unavailable, to try and get love from someone who will never ever validate you the way that you need to be validated too, right? So that's another thing to think about is the fact that it can be very common for a lot of us to chase these people based on past experiences. Another thing to think about too is, okay, if this is true, what are some of the, subconscious things that are going on inside of me? Do I think love is meant to be hard? Do I think love is meant to be, I give myself to the other person in the hopes that if I pour my heart out for them, they will eventually do the same thing for me? These are common beliefs that often are in the realm of anxious attachment, sometimes codependency land as well too. But again, I don't want to just jump to the labels for the reason that we don't necessarily know what's true for you just yet. But given the fact that you didn't really articulate what you were looking for based on what I'm reading, you might have, it does suggest to me that there might be some people-pleasing tendencies going on. Perhaps there might be some stuff going on in terms of fawning, which is the fourth trauma response, the people-pleasing response, meaning that there's a tendency to tiptoe around the needs of others and do stuff for, people who can be difficult in order to try and make ourselves feel safe. So there could be a bit of that going on. And honestly, there could be some subconscious stuff going on too, where you may not actually internally feel good around people who are more, let's just say, grounded, secure, because it's not comfortable to you. A lot of this sort of stuff is the basis for a lot of what I call, emotional rehabilitations, work on becoming more earned in your secure attachment. And that might be something that I would highly recommend you chat to a counselor or a therapist about. Hell, you can speak to one of my team members about working on this as well too. But all in your own time. I would say if it were me, because this is what happened to me, I eventually got to a point where I had dated enough people who were like what you're describing that I was like, I am part of the problem. Yes, there are a lot of people out there, particularly in alphabet soup land of the LGBTQI plus community, who are emotionally unavailable and are also, have a lot of unhealed trauma. And frankly, a lot of those people will never heal because change is too hard for them. Get it? But in saying that, we're not all, contributing to that kind of behavior. And frankly, there's plenty of opportunity for growth and development from us to lead to healthier relationships as well. And I know when I got to the point where I dated enough of these people and I was feeling frustrated, I was like, no, I need to take agency about this because I'm sick and tired of this. And I actually want to stop, being drawn to these people or doing something, unconsciously where I'm drawing these people in as well too. Uh, I would definitely start by maybe looking at some books about attachment theory, like Attached, maybe even looking at the book Facing Love Addiction by Pia Mellody. I would also consider looking for a therapist if you feel like it's appropriate, just on the basis that I think it can be good to find out why this might potentially be happening. And if you do, find someone who's trauma informed and attachment informed. And I think that at the end of the day, it really is just a case of, if you find that you are continuing to date more guys that are like this, we can't ignore that pattern. It's unfair. It's unfortunate. It's not okay that these relationships seem to be all going the same way. And the good news is you can ultimately find some agency to overcome this. So yeah, Max, I just want to round up by saying I am really sorry that you've gone through this because I am no stranger to the experiences you've been through. Been there, done that, bought the shirt far too many times to count. And all I can say is that I think it's wonderful that you at such a young age, from the sound of it, are actually reviewing a lot of this and you're actually learning from a lot of this stuff. And so I think there's plenty of opportunity to overcome what might feel like a curse to you at the moment. But I think at the moment, self-education and just getting awareness of this and self-reflecting are the best first step to working out, more about what this potential issue might actually be. You could just be unlucky, but in my experience, I don't find it is just a case of being unlucky. I think a lot of the times there often is some root causes as to why this keeps playing out. All right. Max, thank you again for submitting this letter to me. If anyone who is listening to this live found this particularly helpful and would like to send a letter to me to go over, I'm very happy to do that. I just need to let everyone know that I will take their letter submissions when we open again for receiving them in the next month. I'll make notifications about that as we're currently all booked out for now with letter submissions. But I hope this is of value to you. And if you like this episode, please like it, share it with people as it really helps the promotion of it all. And thank you very much for participating in another Ken Read segment.